to pre-boarding and onboarding. First thing you'll notice is that once you have your IP address of your management, either from the USB serial or the DHCP server, or using the default IP addresses, the management will come up in your localized language. This is the language that is set on the browser. As a best practice, we recommend and force users creating or customers creating their first user to manage the box. An uncontrolled access to your storage management is security risk. Therefore, we've removed all the default users. There are password complexity requirements, which are shown on the screen while you're creating the first user, and you also get to select your language of choice. And next best practice is setting an update server. What we found is that systems running older firmware are susceptible to known issues which already have fixes. To do this, HPE provides a downloadable manifest, and you can see the URL here. The manifest will alert or send notifications on to the system if there's down-level firmware. Direct access to the internet is not required. A proxy server can be used. And this is it's a requirement to have DNS configured to be able to find the HPE manifest. We'll discuss this more in the update server later in this training. Another best practice is to be on the latest firmware. So before continuing to configure, we give you the option to update to the latest firmware. If the update server's available, it will show available updates and give you a direct link to the smart component to do the update. This will also show your active and available firmware that is on the system already. Firmware updates are recommended to be done through smart components. There are Windows and Linux components. The smart component does additional analysis for optimal conditions for the update and will report a status of the update after completion. A next best practice is to install a license. This will avoid configuration blocks due to licensing later while you're creating your storage. The optional Advanced Data Services license can be added before attempting to configure anything. There's a single license for all optional MSA features. And these features include the performance tiering, an increase of snapshots to 512 from the default 64, and will also enable replication. Licensing and other configuration options can be set later within the SMU interface. Finally, we get to the onboarding. This is a stepwise guide to basic configuration. There's a system configuration menu, and it shows the recommended steps to complete system setup according to best practices. All the steps in here must be explored. There's a quick and easy method to present your first LUNs to your host. While all sections must be explored, not all sections need to be completed, and configuration settings can be reverted or completed later. First, we'll look at the system configuration. The first part of the configuration is setting your network settings. Here we can set IPv4 settings, IPv6 settings, and DNS, or we could skip this section. Let's look at setting IPv4 settings. New for the MSA 6th generation, the IPv4 settings are independent for each controller, meaning you can set one to a manual IP address while the other is DHCP. The system will allow dual controller management, active-active. This is for redundancy or if a network happens to go offline that is your management network. It's also a routable management, so you can access your storage management from anywhere. Next, the IPv6 settings. Auto configuration via DHCP v6 or SLAC is available. Again, it's independent configuration for each controller, and it allows dual controller management, so active-active. This allows for redundancy for the controllers or for a network offline. Again, these are routable, so you can access your system management from anywhere. In addition to the DHCP or SLAC IP address, we allow up to 4 static IPv6 addresses in case you have multiple non-routable networks. The next configuration setting is DNS. This is new for the MSA Gen 6. Here you set a system name unique for each controller. The default is the worldwide ID for the system. There are independent configurations for each controller, and it allows up to 3 DNS servers and up to 3 DNS search domains. So now there's no more searching for your infrastructure IP addresses to set later on, such as your email server, SNMP server, time servers, and others. You can use their fully qualified domain names to find these services. We'll click over to the date and time settings. Date and time can be set manual or set via an NTP. This allows the system to stay accurate on time so you know when an event did occur. With DNS, you don't have to update your system, your array, when your system infrastructure or your infrastructure changes. It's all going to the name and to the DNS server. Next, we'll look at users. There are 3 types of users available in the MSA. There are local users, and there are up to 12 local users. These user slots are shared with the SNMP v3 users. For the local users, all credentials are stored on the system, and you are required to have a minimum of 1 user with full permissions, or the manage role. There are also LDAP users. These are Windows 2016 and Windows 2019 Server Active Directory users. User credentials are not stored on the system, and there are up to 5 user groups allowed. And then SNMP v3 users. This allows management through the Management Information Base, or MIB. There are also alert notifications sent via traps to this user. There are up to 11 SNMP v3 users allowed, and these user slots are shared with local users. Let's look at those a little more. There's already 1 local user with full permissions created that we created when we first logged into the box. You can add new users with usernames up to 29 bytes. Again, the password complexity rules are required. And then there's interface limitations. You can allow access to the WBI or SMU, the CLI, SMIS, and FTP. You can allow different roles or permissions, full permissions or the manage role. Limited permissions, which are designed for LDAP, would be the standard role, and monitor permissions, which are read-only. You can set language or localization. You can set the temperature preference and also a timeout setting. You can also edit the existing users with the pencil icon. And you can delete users with the trash can. But remember, 1 manage role user must be on the system. LDAP. LDAP allows you to use your Active Directory Windows user accounts to access the MSA. First, you must configure the connectivity to the Active Directory. You can set up a search base, or you are required to set up a search base. This can limit the objects to search for in the Active Directory. You set the server and a secure port, and an alternate server and secure port. Then you add user groups. The user groups will have the same types of settings as the local users that we already reviewed. It's recommended to allow LDAP groups to have the standard role. Passed-in user credentials are used to query the Active Directory, so there are no saved credentials on the storage system. When the Active Directory is queried for the user, the first 100 Active Directory groups are listed for the user. The Active Directory groups are compared against the MSA user groups, and the first match is granted user access with the user group permissions. The Active Directory group and the MSA user group must be named exactly the same. Lastly, the SNMP v3 users. This is the ability to use secure SNMP to manage your MSA. Usernames are allowed to be up to 29 bytes, and again, the password complexity rules are required. You can have an authentication type of MD5, SHA, or none, and a privacy type of AES, DES, or none. Password is required for AES and DES. For this user, you will also set a trap destination. The user can manage the array through the MIB, or the same user can receive traps. When you create your first SNMP v3 user, the SNMP protocol is enabled. SNMP is disabled by default. Next, we'll look at the notifications, or what we're calling now alerts. You can configure the system to notify you of actionable issues. The new alert mechanism for the 6th generation will only send actionable notifications. This limits the chattiness of the former MSA event logs. The alerts can be cleared, and so you only see what is current on the system. There are 3 alerting protocols: email, SNMP, and syslog. First, let's configure the email server. Under the email server, you can set the SNMP server using either the IP address, as we have done with previous generation MSAs, or with a fully qualified domain name for your SMTP server. Next, you set a sender address. This is an identifiable name for the array. The array will not receive emails, so there's really no need for the sender email to exist in any directories. You can set a security protocol to TLS or SSL, or none. You can set an alternate SMTP port and a password if that's required by the SMTP server. There are up to 3 email destinations addresses available. And it's always a good idea to test the email configuration, just for any typos that you might have put in or any security limitations in the corporate SMTP implementation. Next, the SNMP. This is configuring SNMP v1 and v2. Here's where you'd set your read community with the ability to read the MIB, and the write community, the ability to change MSA configuration through the MIB. You can add up to 3 trap host addresses, which will receive alerts. And again, it's always a good idea to test the SNMP configuration for those typos in configuration or any other security limitations in the corporate SNMP implementation. The last notification is syslog. Syslog requires a server and a port. And again, you can use the IP address for the syslog, or now that DNS is available, you can use a fully qualified domain name. And again, test the syslog configuration for any kind of typos that you may have put in, or any security limitations in the corporate syslog that you want to know about before you need to get that first alert. Finally, for onboarding in the system configuration, if you have an iSCSI system, you must configure the host ports. The first part of configuring the iSCSI is to select the iSCSI environment parameters, whether you're going to use IPv4 or IPv6. If your infrastructure uses jumbo frames, and if you're going to use CHAP for authentication, and if an ISNS server is available. Next, you'll move to assigning IP addresses, netmask, and gateway for each of the individual host ports. Once this is completed, the iSCSI initiators can now log in to complete the onboarding process for presenting storage. The next section is configuring a pool. A pool is defined by the first disk group added. You can also add spares here. Dynamic sparing is enabled by default on the system, and this allows the system to use any available drive for a spare. Note that the MSA DP Plus RAID level does not use spare disks. We'll look at more on disk group creation later in this training. So here's the main menu again. We've already gone through the system configuration, and we've gone through the storage configuration of creating pools. Both of these allow revisits in case you need to change something or want to check on what something was set to. The next part is provisioning LUNs to hosts. Or you could skip this and complete the onboarding and move to the SMU v4 dashboard. We'll look at the provisioning first. The provisioning gives a brief introduction to the steps in the guide, where you create hosts from the discovered initiators, you create new volumes, and then you attach or present those LUNs to the hosts. And then you can repeat this for all hosts. So the first step is it will show you discovered initiators, and you can create nicknames for the initiators and also combine those into a host. Optionally, you could create a host group where multiple hosts, which would be in a cluster, could be presented LUNs at the same time. After you've created your host, you have the option to create volumes for the newly configured hosts. You can create a new volume or use existing volumes. Or you can skip this step and configure LUNs later. If you decide to create a new volume, you can select the volume details, such as pool, volume name, and volume size. Once you've done this and continued, you get a summary of the tasks to be completed. It shows the hosts and/or host groups that will be created, the volumes, and here's where it includes the automatic LUN number for that host. Once that's completed, you can repeat for the next host or next host group. You should do each host or host group individually, and then multiple LUNs can be presented to the host or host group at the same time. This is the task-oriented view of the SMU v4. Here's where we believe that hosts with no volumes have limited value, and volumes that are not attached to hosts also have limited value. Next, we'll move to looking at the dashboard. The dashboard is a glance at your overall system health and state of your array. The dashboard consists of 4 sections. In the top left are the alerts. These are actionable health indications. In the top right is the capacity and the overall usage of the pool or pools of the system. In the bottom left is the performance. These are configurable graphs to help you monitor what's important to you. And in the bottom right is the activity, the current, future, and past system tasks. Let's look at alerts first. Again, alerts are actionable notifications from the storage system. These are based on conditions which happen to the array. Some conditions which would cause a degraded health, such as a drive failure, and some conditions which would cause limited functionality, such as a host port disconnected. The alerts remove the chattiness of the system event logs, so you'll see no more messages that a scrub has completed, and no more messages that a volume was created. These notifications are still available in the event log for debug and troubleshooting, but have no actions to take. What we see here is the dashboard widget. You click on the boxes to display the lists below them. Under Active Health Alerts will be the current alerts showing the system to be degraded. Under Informational Alerts, you can show alerts for conditions which may be limiting in functionality. Under Alerts to Acknowledge, you can remove resolve alerts or flag alerts which are not resolved but flagged as known. And then you also notice that here you can see a special notification for down-level firmware for a disk. This requires the update server to be configured. You can also click on the arrow to view the expanded panel for the alerts. We'll do that now. Here's the expanded panel. Again, we have health alerts, which will show the conditions, such as a disk was removed from the system, and the results of that. Disk group DGA01 became degraded, and a disk group reconstruction started. Next, we'll move over to the informational alerts. An example here is the condition that host port 2 on controller A is disconnected. And you can see the result of this one, as the user manage has acknowledged this issue. The system has limited host connectivity, but that may be acceptable in this environment. Next, we'll look at the alerts to acknowledge. This shows all the alerts on the system. Alerts may have conditions which have been resolved, such as the host was attached to a volume in this case. You can acknowledge a resolved alert and it will no longer be listed. You can also acknowledge unresolved alerts to signify that this alert was investigated and considered to be acceptable. And finally, the last tab in the alerts expanded view is the history. This is the details of the conditions which generated the alerts. Next, we'll look at the dashboard capacity widget. And here we see both a single pool system and a dual pool system with the widget. These are easy to read graphs of the current capacity usage of one or two pools. You can click on the arrow to see the expanded panel for capacity. This gives more granular details on the system capacity utilization. It shows the physical and logical limits, such as mappable LUNs and base volumes, snapshots used and the limit, and the drives used and drives available and slots available. Below that are the pool details. We have the capacity horseshoe graph, which shows how much capacity of the pool is being used. We have base volumes and snapshots available on this pool, and a bar graph of the allocation for the pool, including a bar graph of tier capacity used. Volumes listing at the bottom. This is one of the many ways to get to a list of your volumes. Next, we'll look at the performance. This is the widget on the dashboard of the performance graphs. performance collection is always on for some metrics and can be enabled for others. The system defaults to having these three graphs: system IOPS, system latency, and system throughput. On the dashboard, you can add up to 8 graphs, and these are chosen as favorites from the expanded view. And here's where you can monitor the performance you want. We'll click on the arrow to go to the slide over expanded view. The first thing to note on the slide over is the ability to change the time frame. When you change the time frame here, it'll change the time frame shown on the dashboard, although live data is not available on the dashboard. The live data will show you a data point every 5 seconds for the last 15 minutes. Other time frames, the data is graphed every 15 minutes. If you want to add a graph, there are multiple objects that you can track. You can track the system, which some of these data points are already graphed by default. You can graph host ports. You can look at controllers, and you can look at volumes. There's different parameters available for each of these. IOPS, read and write, are available for all the objects. Throughput, read and write, are available for all the objects. And latency, average or max, and read and write are available for all the objects. Queue depth is available for host ports and volumes, and that's on read and write. And the cache for controllers and volumes. And here you can look at read ahead, small d stages, write cache percentage, and write cache space. Here's another view of the expanded view. Again, the data time frame. And then there's graph options on each graph. The heart graph option will allow this graph to become a favorite and show up on the desktop or on the dashboard. You can use the up and down arrows to make a favorite, to make that graph move up or down in the listing of graphs. You can use the gear icon to edit the parameters of the graph. And you can also use the paper with the up arrow to download the data into a CSV format. And finally, you can use the X to remove the graph from both the expanded view and from the dashboard. The final widget on the dashboard is the activity widget. Activities are system tasks and scheduled tasks. For example, disk scrubs or disk group scrubs. A SAS backend rescan for added or removed hardware. You can see scheduled snapshots, and you can see scheduled replications. You can see disk group rebuilds, initializations, or rebalances, and other system tasks here. This will give you a view of what the storage system is doing, or what it will be doing, or what it has already completed. And you can click the arrow to view the expanded panel for activities. That now. The activities panel expanded view is just that, an expanded view of the widget. It allows you to filter the list of in-progress activities, if you should have multiple. It allows you to filter the list of the scheduled activities, and it allows you to expand and filter the list of the completed activities. Next, we'll move on to the SMU v4 provisioning. Under the volumes, you see a bar graph of the pool utilization. This is the actual use or base volumes amount allocated. You can see snapshots allocated, and this will show the maximum possible allocated to a snapshot. not necessarily what is currently allocated. You can see the total committed or provisioned, and you can see if the pool has been overcommitted. Again, you'll see a volumes list, and you'll be able to add a data protection of local snapshots or replications. Here's more on provisioning volumes. You can create volumes, and this is the same as the onboarding we went through before. We have an actions dropdown for selected volumes. Under this actions dropdown, you can delete volumes, attach to hosts, detach from hosts, expand the volume, add data protection, roll back a volume, reset a snapshot, or copy the volume. Not all actions are available for all volumes, and multiple paths to the same actions. So the expanded view of a volume gives you an overview. Here's where you can change the volume name or some other parameters of that volume. You can expand the volume or you can copy the volume. A volume which is attached to hosts cannot be copied. Volume must be unmapped from all hosts before you can copy it. This task-oriented style allows you to perform the next tasks from where you are. There's no hunting for the right screen, so multiple paths are available to accomplish the same task. Under provisioning volumes, the expanded view, you can also see the snapshots. You can view the scheduled snapshots, view the snapshots specific to this volume, add new snapshots, roll back the snapshots, or reset the snapshots. You can look at the attached hosts. You can attach more or modify hosts. You can edit the permissions, you can edit LUN numbers, and you can edit used ports. The default is to use all the ports. You can also manage a remote replication. There will be another training for replication in the coming week. Now that we've looked at volumes, let's look at data protection. You can add data protection. This is adding snapshots or scheduled snapshots. From the actions dropdown for selected volumes or snapshots, you can delete volumes, you can add more data protection, you can roll back a volume, reset a snapshot, or copy the volume. Again, not all snap actions are available for all volumes, and there are multiple paths to the same actions. Volumes and snapshots are nearly identical to the system and are treated in much the same way in many instances. You can click the arrow to see more details of a volume or a snapshot, and this is the same as what we just covered. So here we've clicked on Add Data Protection. Again, there's a guide to create your local or your remote snapshots. From the first page, you select the volume, and we'll select a local snapshot. Then you move over to the schedule, which will allow you to create an immediate snapshot or to schedule a snapshot. Under the schedule of snapshots, you can set the name, the retention count, the prefix name, when the first snapshot should be taken, how often to repeat it, when to end creating these snapshots, and any time and day constraints, such as not to create the snapshot on a weekend. And finally, you'll get a summary of this. This page is not shown. Next, we'll look at provisioning hosts. So working from the host to the volume to complete the task of provisioning storage. You can create hosts, and this is the same as the onboarding screen. Under the Actions dropdown, you can select a host, and you can attach volumes, detach volumes, remove an initiator from a host, remove a host from a host group, add a host to a host group, delete a host, or delete a host group. You can click on the arrow to see more details of each host. Here's the expanded view of a single host. In the overview, you can see you can edit the host name with the pencil, or you can edit the initiator with the pencil. This will allow you to edit the nickname or set the profile of standard or HPUX. There's a tab to attach volumes, and that's the same as the volumes details that we previously went through. Under the hosts, there's also an All Initiators tab. This is another way to create a host. You can show more details for the initiator, and you can set the nickname with the arrow. Under the Action drop-down for the selected initiators, you can add an initiator to an existing host or remove it from a host. Next, we'll look at settings. Many of the settings have already been covered once in the onboarding section. So we'll go through these where you can find the locations of setting the same settings and also set other advanced settings. Topics here include network, users, system, notification, and peer connections. Under the setting of networks, we have our IPv4 settings, which is the same as in the onboarding. IPv6 settings, again, same as in the onboarding. And the DNS settings, which is same as the onboarding that we've already gone through. The next section is the services. The next tab is the services, which allows different management services for enabling management protocols. We have different sections, and these align to the user permissions. There's the WBI section, which allows HTTP, which is disabled by default, and HTTPS, which is enabled by default. The CLI section of Telnet and SSH, with Telnet being disabled and SSH being enabled, and FTP section with FTP being disabled and SFTP being enabled. There's also the SMIS section, and SMIS is disabled by default. Other interfaces are SNMP, which is disabled by default, and the SLP, which is enabled by default. And finally, we have the Certificates tab. Here's where you can view the current security certificates loaded on the MSA controllers. The system comes default with a self-signed certificate, but a custom certificate can be loaded via the FTP or SFTP interface. Next, we'll look at the system settings and in the users, again, here's the local users interface, and this is the same layout as in the onboarding. The LDAP configuration and user groups, again, same as in the onboarding, and the SNMP v3 users, which is, again, is the same layout as in the onboarding. We'll move to system settings. Here, you can set an identification. This sets a system name, which would be a unique name for this system. A system contact, the person who's responsible for this storage. A system location, a location where the storage is at. And system information, such as any other information that you want to keep with the system, such as asset information. This information will appear in logs and will aid in knowing which system is which and where it is located. The next tab is the date and time, and you can set NTP or local, and that is again the same as layout as the onboarding. We'll move over to the We'll move over to the Security tab, where we allow the configuration for full disk encryption. For full disk encryption, the system must contain only drives which are self-encrypting drives. HPE is selling 960 gig and 1.92 terabyte small form factor drives, 2.4 terabyte small form factor hard drives, and 12 terabyte large form factor midline SAS drives. The drives are all hardware encrypting, so there's no performance degradation when encrypting. When configured, this provides data at rest encryption, so a drive removed from the system is unreadable. And the entire system can be locked in case it needs to be transported. Full disk encryption uses a passphrase from the customer to generate a lock key ID. This lock key is then used with the individual drives to enable encryption at the drive level. To secure the system, click on the Secure System and enter the user-specified passphrase. Once the system is secure, you can change the passphrase. You can lock it for transport. This is removing the lock keys. You can repurpose secured disks. This will clear drives with unknown lock key IDs. Or you can repurpose the entire system, which clears all the drives and unsecures the system. Finally, we'll look at the properties. Properties are advanced settings which should not be adjusted without knowing the expected results. Cache property changes can change how the read and write cache behaves. Disk properties apply to all the disks in the system. Here's where you set the dynamic sparing. This allows the system to use any available drive as a spare. You can also turn on disk spin down. But disk spin down has a limited value in a virtual environment where all disks are in use. More properties are the scrub properties. Scrub properties enable or disable background scrubbing. This scrub will scrub any unused, so available or spare drive will be scrubbed for errors. Disk group scrubs all stripes in a disk group for errors. Both of these are enabled by default. The next property is manage logs. The manage logs enables the MSA to offload system logs to an email address. Effectively, this extends the logs, which would normally be overwritten. Often seen in support cases is that the system has rolled the logs and the needed information is not available. Using manage logs, you should be able to recover all that information. And the final property is the firmware properties, where you enable or disable partner firmware update. Partner firmware update is enabled by default and is not recommended to be disabled. Next, we'll look at the notifications. And again, we will review this in onboarding. So you have your email SMTP notifications, which again is the same as that we did in onboarding. SNMP notifications, same as in onboarding. And the syslog notifications, which is the same layout as in onboarding. And finally, we'll look at the peer connections. Peer connections show the ports which can be used to connect to another MSA system for replication. You can review and validate connections. The peer connection is created when the volume replication guide is started. This is the task-based management guiding you through all the needed steps when you're creating that replication. There will be more information on replications available in the replication training in a week. And finally, we'll look at the maintenance topic. The maintenance area is a an area for less common tasks. This is where you would add, remove, or edit storage and properties of the pool. You can look at the hardware, a logical view of the hardware with details. You can enable or disable identification LEDs, restart or shut down the system, and perform a manual rescan of the SAS back in. Under the firmware area, you can review active and available system firmwares. You can review available drive firmware updates, and you can set up the new update server for the MSA Gen 6. There's an About section, which gives helpful links for additional information and provides details about the system to aid when you're connecting with support. And finally, the support topic, where you can do logs collection, you can install licenses, and you can review the debug logs. Under the maintenance storage topic, this is where the physical storage is configured. You can edit the pool to set threshold warnings and to enable over-provisioning. You can add a disk group to a pool. You can remove a disk group from a pool. And when you click the arrow to see more details or make changes to a disk group. We're going to add a disk group first. So here's the add disk group frame, which we did not go through in onboarding. You add a disk group and this is selected per pool. Under the drop-down, you set the RAID level. The RAID levels available are 1, 10, 5, 6, or the new MSA-DP+. You can also create a read cache. The checkboxes on the drives should be selected for the drives to be included in the disk group. Non-applicable drives will be grayed out, such as when you select a read cache, only SSDs will be listed. On the far right is a summary of the disk group. This will show you the current number of disks selected, the minimum number of disks for the disk group based on RAID level, the maximum number of drives available for that RAID level, the raw size of the entire disk group, and a pie chart showing the overhead and provisioning of the raw storage. Once the minimum number of drives is selected, the Add button in the bottom left is made available. At this point, the disk group name is unimportant, but it can be changed later. Here we've selected the arrow to show the expanded view of a disk group. Here you can change the disk group name. You can also expand a disk group for MSA DP Plus disk groups only. If you expand the disk group, it shows you the percent of the drive which will be used for expansion and the percent which will be used for overhead. You can increase the spare capacity available on an MSA DP Plus disk group, but that's only through the CLI, and it must be done before adding drives to the disk group. As soon as you've selected to expand the disk group, the rebalance will start. From the disk group slide over, you can also verify disk groups, and you can scrub disk groups. And then there's a tab to list the disks that are included in the disk group. The next topic under maintenance is hardware. Under the hardware view, you see a logical front and rear view of the hardware, and you can select the different objects for details. Once you select the object, you get an Actions drop-down on the right-hand side. Under the enclosure, the actions will allow you to restart or shut down, rescan, or turn on the Locate LED, which is a blue LED on the front and back of the system. Under controller, the only action is you can turn on the locate LED, which is a blue LED on the controller. Under host port, you can reset the host ports. And under drives, you can turn on the locate LED. The drives for the MSA Gen 6 do not have a blue LED. So to locate a drive, the amber LED will turn on for 3 seconds and off for 1 second. A 1 second on, 1 second off amber LED will indicate a faulted disk. The next topic under maintenance is firmware. This is the same layout as seen during onboarding, but additional tabs are available for updating disks and configuring the update server. The System tab will show available updates if the update server is configured, as shown in this picture. The Disk tab will show available updates if the update server is also configured. That tab is not shown. System and disk firmware updates are recommended to be done using the smart components. Updating through the SMU interface is possible, but it is not recommended. Under the update server, you configure the system to check for the latest firmware. HPE will provide a system downloadable manifest. This is where the system, when configured, will automatically go out to hpe.com and pull down the manifest and validate the firmwares available in the manifest with the firmware on the system. So there's no user intervention required. The manifest will include a review of firmware for the system and drives. The manifest is in a JSON output, and it has links to the firmware download sites. Alerts and links on the dashboard are available when down-level firmware is found. And this is configurable for non-internet connected sites. If a proxy server needs to be configured to connect to the internet, that's available here as well. Also, for sites which cannot get to the internet, the manifest can be copied to a local web server. And then the system can be pointed to that local web server. This will require the manifest to be updated by recopying it periodically to remain current. Next is the About topic. The About topic gives many useful links. The first is to the MSA Health Check. It's always a good idea to validate your system after setup to verify that you connected with all the best practices. The next link is to the MSA firmware site. This will allow you to quickly find all of the firmware available for your MSA systems. The next is the MSA Drive firmware link. And this is a page which has all the MSA Drive firmwares available and direct links to their downloads. The next link is the MSA Docs. You can find documentation for your MSA system. And the last link is the MSA Forum. For when you have a question but don't want to engage with support, you can ask the community, and the community is monitored by many HPE employees. Under that, you have general system information. This is the information set when we went through the settings for the system. Below that is the hardware information. This is a really valuable piece of information. This shows you the SKU and the serial number for each enclosure. This is what ties you to your support. The last section is the storage information. And this is the pool details. And these have been coalesced from other locations in the SMU. The last maintenance topic is support. And here's where you can collect the logs. These are for use with MSA Health Check and are many times required when working with support. It's also a good idea to keep a set of logs to have your configuration information for your system. The Manage Log settings will email out logs as they fill to avoid losing log data, but they will not contain the configuration information. And logs are available for customer review, but they typically require some training to interpret. Under the maintenance support are 3 other tabs. First is the licensing, and this is the same layout as we saw in the onboarding. Next are the event logs. These are the logs of every event on the system. They are very chatty, and they're used for debug purposes. And the final log is the audit log. These are logs per controller and contain up to 2 megabytes. These track all logins and commands run on the system, and they're used for debug purposes. That's the overview of the SMU v4. Thank you for attending.
So John, would you like me to read out to you, or read out the question number 5 to you?
No, I'll take that one. So the question is, where's the best place in the SMU to locate the MSA serial number when opening a support case? And that's under the maintenance about. Under the system information there, you can find not only your MSA serial number per enclosure, but also the SKU number. And these 2 numbers, these 2 details are what allow you to have the entitlement. So the next question is, smart components for firmware upgrades. Will there be separate upgrades for controllers, disk shelves, and drives? So there are 2 different smart components. There's a system level, which will upgrade the controllers and also upgrade disk shelves. And then there's also a smart component for drives. So there's no component for just disk shelves. But to upgrade disk shelves, you can activate the current active firmware that's on the system, and that will upgrade the disk shelves to the latest version.
Yeah, this is Kip Glover. Quick question. For the manifest file, if I go to the URL, I look at it, I can see it. Is there something when I look at it that will tell me the date it's published, or how can I tell if it's been updated?
I don't know offhand where that information is. I believe that there is a version in the manifest file, but I will find that information and get it to the team.
Okay, so the best way would be to look through SMU probably then.
Yeah, the SMU will go out weekly to check that manifest file, and it will validate that it'll pull down the manifest file and do the comparison to the current one.
Cool. Thanks, JP. Sorry about that.
Yep, no worries.
All right, participants, any more questions?
There's one more. It's somewhere between a question and a statement. So the amber LED on for locate for drives can be misleading. When you see it, it definitely stands out as something different. Unfortunately, the hardware we chose did not have the blue LED available, so we had to come up with a solution, and we believe that having the blink rate was the best solution.